The galaxy, vast and ancient, hummed with the cold logic of entropy and conquest. Civilizations rose on the bones of predecessors, fueled by the relentless calculus of expansion. Resources were finite. Ambition was not. And Earth was a footnote, a pale blue dot catalogued in the dusty archives of the ascendancy of Cathar as Sol 3 Class M, nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, hydrosphere, present, biosphere, anomalous. The anomaly wasn't the life microbial blooms were common, it was the ferocity of it, the sheer chaotic self-destructive violence woven into the dominant species' genetic and cultural fabric. The Cathari scouts who'd skimmed the upper atmosphere centuries ago, observing primitive tribes warring over scraps of land, had filed their report with clinical disdain. Potential resource extraction site. Species designation Homo sapiens. Classification Deathworlder, high risk, recommend. Avoid direct contact. Monitor passively. Low strategic priority. Low priority. That was the fatal error. Centuries passed. The ascendancy expanded, its crystalline spires piercing nebulae, its fleets harvesting gas giants and stripping barren moons. But the core worlds grew hungry. The delicate biolattices that powered their cities, the shimmering veins of iridescent ore that fueled their void drives, they were dwindling. Scans, deep and probing, revisited the old archives. Sol Shai, not just water and atmosphere. Buried deep within its crust lay veins of Vespryx, a hyper-dense crystalline lattice capable of storing and channeling energy on a scale that dwarfed anything the ascendancy possessed. A miracle material, the ultimate resource. And the Deathworlders, primitive, divided, barely spacefaring, their anomalous violence was a relic of a savage past. Surely, a manageable nuisance. The report was amended. Sol Shai, Vespryx. Reserves confirmed, grade Alpha. Species Homo sapiens. Classification Deathworlder, mitigatable risk. Recommend full-scale resource acquisition. Minimal force protocol. The sky tore open on a Tuesday. Not with fire, not with thunder, but with impossible silence. One moment the familiar constellations, the next a jagged wound in the heavens, bleeding starlight that coalesced into sleek obsidian vessels, shaped like obsidian shards. They hung silent and immense, casting long, cold shadows over continents. No declaration, no warning, just the sudden, chilling presence of the inevitable. In the rain-slicked streets of what was once Vancouver, now Sector Gamma 7, under the Cathari Occupation Authority, Corporal Anya Rostova huddled deeper into the threadbare collar of her greatcoat. The air tasted of ozone and something else, metallic, alien, like licking a battery. Above, the sky was perpetually bruised by the underbellies of the Cathari harvesters, colossal machines that drilled into the planet's bones, siphoning the precious Vespryx. The ground trembled constantly, a low thrum that vibrated in your teeth, a reminder of the violation happening deep below. Enya wasn't a soldier anymore. Not officially. The United Earth Defense Force had shattered in the first 72 hours of the invasion, overwhelmed by energy lances that vaporized tanks and disintegrated fortifications, outmaneuvered by silent, agile skiffs that plucked resistance cells from the shadows before they could form. She'd seen her platoon commander, a grizzled veteran named Briggs, try to rally a defense at the old naval base. He'd stood on the rubble, roaring defiance into the uncaring sky before a single precise beam of emerald light turned him and the concrete slab he stood on into a fine gray ash. The message was clear. Resistance was inefficient, pointless. Now Anya moved like a ghost through the skeletal remains of her city. Her mission wasn't glory, it was survival. And information. She worked for the nascent, fragmented resistance. A loose network of former soldiers, engineers, doctors, and desperate civilians who refused to become docile cattle. Her specialty, observation. She saw things others missed. The subtle shifts in Cathari patrol patterns, the flicker of unease in the multifaceted eyes of a low-ranking drone operator. The way the alien overseers, the Zarakai, seemed distracted, preoccupied. She watched them now from a shattered office window 3 stories up. 2 Zarakai stood near a repurposed transit hub. their forms tall and slender, encased in seamless pearlescent armor that seemed to drink the weak sunlight. Their heads were elongated ovals, devoid of visible mouths, dominated by large compound eyes that shifted color like oil on water, currently a calm, assessing amber. They communicated through subtle shifts in posture and low-frequency hums that vibrated the air, efficient, cold, utterly alien. One of them, designated Kalen in the Resistance crude intel, gestured with a three-fingered hand towards a group of humans being herded towards a processing center. Their movements were slow, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, defeated. Kalen's eye facets flickered a brief, dismissive violet. Inefficient biomass. The gesture seemed to say, a necessary inconvenience. Ania's jaw tightened. She remembered Briggs. She remembered the screams from the refugee camps when the Qatari relocated entire districts to make way for their drilling rigs. She remembered the smell of burning plastic and flesh after a compliance sweep. This wasn't just occupation, it was erasure. And the Qatari, for all their technological superiority, seemed utterly blind to the storm brewing beneath their polished boots. Her comms bead, a scavenged Qatari microtransmitter jury-rigged to human frequencies, buzzed softly against her ear. Sarostova? Status? The voice was gruff, familiar. Elias Vance, former chief engineer of the UES Dauntless, now the reluctant, pragmatic leader of Sector Gamma-7's cell, eyes on Jarkai patrol near Hub 7. Anya murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Kalen's present. They're processing another batch. Morales, non-existent down there, Elias. Like sheep to slaughter. A sigh crackled over the line. We can't save them all, Anya. Not yet. Focus on the pattern. Anything new? Any weakness? Anya scanned the scene again. The Qatari moved with unnerving precision, but their flank guards, she noted, her eyes narrowing. They're rotating every 15 minutes, same as yesterday, but the one on the east side, he's favoring his left leg strut. Minor damage, maybe from debris. He's slower to pivot. Noted, Elias said, a spark of something, calculation, perhaps hope in his voice. Good eyes, Rostova. Keep watching. And stay sharp. Intel suggests Kalen's getting impatient. Something's brewing. The comms bead went silent. Anya pressed herself flatter against the cold concrete. Impatient? Why? The Vespryx extraction was proceeding smoothly, according to intercepted, heavily encrypted Qatari data burst the Resistance text could only partially decode. What could possibly make the coldly efficient Zhizharkai impatient? Her gaze drifted past the processing hub, towards the distant, skeletal outline of the main Vespryx refinery complex. It pulsed with an internal, sickly green light, the heart of the Qatari operation on Earth. And deep within its labyrinthine depths, she knew lay the source of their power, and perhaps their vulnerability. On the command spire of the primary Qatari vessel, the unblinking eye, High Overseer Vraxithul observed the planet below through a panoramic viewport that rendered the scarred world in stark high-definition clarity. Sol 3. A resource-rich anomaly. A puzzle wrapped in primitive aggression. His multifaceted eyes, currently a deep, contemplative indigo, tracked the progress of the harvesters. These streaks' yields were exceeding projections. The Deathworlders were compliant, efficiently processed. Their anomalous violence seemed a myth, a historical footnote rendered obsolete by superior technology and overwhelming force. Yet, unease coiled in Vraxithul's core processors. It was illogical. The data streams were optimal. The biomass was docile. The resource flow was steady. But the silence of the conquered species felt wrong, not peaceful, waiting. Like the stillness before a seismic event, his subordinate, Kalen, shared this disquiet, though Kalen attributed it to the inherent unpredictability of organic life. Vraxithul suspected something deeper. He accessed the historical archives again, pulling up the original scout report. The grainy footage showed primitive humans engaging in ritualized combat, building crude fortifications, even turning their own environment against each other with terrifying ingenuity. Self-destructive, the report concluded, but also adaptive. resilient in the face of extreme adversity. Rexiphenel had dismissed it as irrelevant noise. Now, watching the hollow-eyed humans shuffle towards processing centers, he wondered, was this compliance genuine, or was it a different kind of adaptation? A strategy. Overseer. Kalen's resonant hum vibrated through the command chamber. The Zarkai stood at attention, his posture rigid, eye facets a neutral gray. The final phase of the primary extraction node is complete. Vespryx purification efficiency is at 98.7%. We are ahead of schedule. Efficiency is commendable, Kalen. Vraxtal hummed back, his tone measured. But vigilance is paramount. The biomass exhibits anomalous passivity. Monitor behavioral patterns closely. Any deviation, however minor, is to be reported immediately. Kalen inclined his head. Understood, Overseer. Though I maintain their capacity for organized resistance was eliminated in the initial pacification. They are broken. Broken things can still be sharp, Kalen. Vraxtal intoned, his eye facets shifting to a wary amber. Do not underestimate the lethality of desperation, or the ingenuity born of extinction. He turned back to the viewport, the green pulse of the refinery complex a hypnotic, ominous beacon. Below, in the rain-slicked ruins of Vancouver, a human woman watched his ships with eyes that held no hollow resignation, only cold, calculating fire. Vexcatl couldn't see her, but the unease in his core processors deepened, a silent alarm bell ringing in the sterile perfection of his command spire. Days bled into weeks. The Kinthari tightened their grip. Curfews became absolute. Rations dwindled. Public executions for minor infractions became commonplace. Stark reminders of the cost of defiance. The resistance, fragmented and hunted, operated in the shadows, striking small, precise blows, sabotaging a power conduit here, disabling a surveillance drone there, more to maintain a flicker of hope than to inflict real damage. Anya became a phantom, moving through the city's underbelly, gathering intelligence, her observations painting a picture of Kinthari routine, but also of their blind spots, their arrogance. She learned their patrol routes by heart. She noted the specific frequencies their comms used, the blind spots in their sensor grids created by the city's ruined skyline. She saw the subtle signs of strain among the lower-ranking Kinthari drones, the slight tremor in a manipulator arm, the flicker of fatigue in their eye facets after extended shifts. They were machines, but they were organic machines, susceptible to wear and tear, to the grinding monotony of occupation. Elias Vance, holed up in a flooded subway tunnel that reeked of Medu and despair, pored over Anya's reports. His face, etched with lines of exhaustion and responsibility, was grim. They're getting sloppy, he muttered, tracing a route on a grease-stained map. Complacent, they think they've won. They have won, Alias, Anya said, her voice flat. She sat on an overturned crate, cleaning a scavenged pulse pistol with meticulous care. We're just delaying the inevitable, making them work for it. Maybe, Elias conceded, his eyes meeting hers. There was a fierce, stubborn light in them. But what if we could do more than delay? What if we could hit them where it hurts? Not just a drone, not just a conduit, but the source. Anya froze, the cleaning rag hovering over the pistol's barrel. The refinery, the core, Elias whispered, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp. The primary Vespryx purification chamber. Our techs, they've been analyzing the energy signatures, the waste heat patterns. They think there's a resonance frequency, a harmonic instability in the containment field. If we could overload it at the precise moment. He didn't need to finish. Anya saw it instantly. The catastrophic chain reaction. The purified Vespryx wasn't just stored. It was active, a contained singularity of potential energy. Destabilize it, and the resulting explosion wouldn't just destroy the refinery. It could cripple the entire Kinthari fleet in orbit, maybe even crack the planet's crust. It was suicide. Glorious, planet-shattering suicide. The risk, Anya breathed. The risk is extinction if we do nothing. Elias snapped, then softened, seeing the conflict in her eyes. I know, Anya. I know what Briggs meant to you, what they took from you. But this is bigger. This is for everyone. For Earth. Silence stretched, thick with the weight of the decision. The distant thrum of the harvesters vibrated through the tunnel walls. Enya looked down at the pulse pistol, then at the map showing the heavily fortified path to the refinery's heart. She thought of the hollow eyes in the processing lines. She thought of Briggs turning to ash. She thought of the Cathari, so cold, so certain of their victory, blind to the predator they'd caged. A slow, grim smile touched her lips. It wasn't hopeful. It was feral. "Tell me what you need me to do, Elias." The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. It required precision, timing, and a level of coordination the Resistance hadn't managed since the war began. It required a team small enough to be invisible, skilled enough to bypass Cathari security, and desperate enough to walk into the lion's den knowing they wouldn't walk out. Enya was the scout, the pathfinder. Elias would coordinate from the tunnel, feeding them real-time intel hacked from compromised Cathari nodes. The muscle would be Jax, a hulking former demolition expert with hands like shovels and a temper as volatile as the charges he carried. And May, a wiry, silent woman whose fingers could bypass any lock or security system. The Cathari threw up, her eyes holding the haunted look of someone who'd lost everything worth living for. They moved under the cover of a manufactured electromagnetic storm, a crude device Elias's techs had jury-rigged to scramble local Cathari sensors for a precious 15 minutes. Rain lashed down, turning the ruins into a treacherous maze of mud and jagged metal. Enya led, her senses hyper-alert. Every shadow a potential threat, every distant hum a possible patrol skiff. She navigated by memory and instinct, using the Cathari's own predictable patrol routes against them, slipping through the gaps like smoke. The refinery complex loomed ahead, a monstrous cathedral of alien technology, pulsing with that sickly green light. Guard towers bristled with energy cannons. Patrol drones, silent and insectile, scanned the perimeter with overlapping beams of crimson light. The air crackled with contained power. "This is it," Enya whispered into her comm, her voice tight. "Perimeter sensors are down for now. Jax, Mag, stay close. Remember the blind spot near the secondary coolant intake. 30 seconds. They moved like shadows, darting across open ground, pressing themselves against the cold, humming hull of the complex. May was already at the access panel, her fingers flying over the alien interface, bypassing layers of security with unnerving speed. The panel hissed open. Darkness yawned within. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. Strange bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an eerie shifting glow. The thrumming was louder here, a physical pressure in the chest. They moved deeper, following Anya's memorized schematics, avoiding the main corridors, sticking to maintenance shafts and service tunnels. Every corner held the potential for a Cathari patrol. Every sound could be their death knell. They reached the inner sanctum, a vast, cavernous chamber dominated by a central column of swirling liquid light, the purified Vespryx core. It radiated palpable energy, making the air shimmer. Around it, intricate machinery hummed and clicked, maintaining the delicate containment field. This was the heart, the prize, the bomb. May went to work on the primary control console, her face illuminated by the console's soft blue glow. Jax began placing his shaped charges with practiced silent efficiency at key structural stress points around the chamber, his movements surprisingly delicate for his size. Enya stood guard at the entrance to the chamber, her pulse pistol held ready, her eyes scanning the dark corridor beyond. The electromagnetic storm's effect was waning. Time was running out. "Almost there," May whispered, her voice strained. "Just need to bypass the final harmonic dampener." A low, resonant hum echoed down the corridor. Not the usual patrol drone whine. Deeper, more deliberate. Anya's blood ran cold. Contact. Single entity. Approaching fast. She didn't need to see it to know. The human carried the signature of command, of Jarka. Kellen. He must have sensed the anomaly. The brief sensor blackout. The disturbance in the energy flow. He was coming to investigate. Me. How long? Enya hissed, pressing herself flat against the wall beside the chamber entrance, raising her pistol. 30 seconds, maybe less. May's voice was tight with panic. Jax finished placing the last charge, his face grim. He hefted his heavy pulse rifle, taking position beside Anya. We hold him. Buy her time. The hum grew louder, closer. The corridor lights flickered, then stabilized, casting long, distorted shadows. Then he appeared. Kalen stood at the far end of the corridor, silhouetted against the dim light. His pearlescent armor seemed to absorb the gloom. His eye facets, usually shifting colors, were fixed on the chamber entrance. On them, burning with a cold, furious violet. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He didn't need to. His presence was a weapon. He took a step forward, then another, deliberate, unhurried, confident. Anya's finger tightened on the trigger. Jax's rifle whined. As it powered up, the thrumming of the Vespryx core seemed to sync with the frantic pounding of Anya's heart. Galen stopped 10 meters away. His head tilted slightly, a gesture that might have been curiosity or contempt. A low, guttural hum vibrated from him. Not a question, but a statement. A judgment. Inefficient. Wasteful. Doomed. He raised one three-fingered hand, not in threat but in a gesture of dismissal. Of finality. Enya didn't hesitate. She fired. The pulse bolt sizzled through the air, striking Kalen's chest plate. It flared brightly, then dissipated, leaving only a faint scorch mark on the pearlescent surface. Kalen didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to notice. He took another step. Jax opened up with his heavy rifle, the roar deafening in the confined space. Bolts of searing energy slammed into Kalen, staggering him back a half-step, cracking his armor, but not penetrating. The Zarkai's eye facets blazed with incandescent white fury. May now, Anya screamed, firing again, knowing it was futile buying seconds with her life. May slammed her hand down on the console. Charges armed. Detonation sequence initiated. 30 seconds. Kalen roared, a sound like shattering crystal, and lunged impossibly fast. His hand outstretched not for a weapon but for them. Anya and Jax fired desperately, their weapons overheating, their bolts barely slowing the enraged Zorkai. He was on them, his armored fist swinging with bone-shattering force. Jax took the blow full in the chest, the sound of ribs cracking audible even over the rifle's whine. He crumpled, gasping. Anya rolled aside, firing point-blank into Kalen's face. One eye facet shattered, spraying viscous fluid. He staggered, howling in pain and rage, but kept coming. Go, Anya, Jax choked out, blood bubbling on his lips. Get out. The console behind May beeped frantically. 10 seconds. Anya looked at Jax, broken on the floor, at May frozen in terror at the console, at Kalen blinded in one eye but still advancing. A force of pure alien wrath. There was no escape. The corridor behind Kalen was clear, but the detonation, it would consume everything within a kilometer. They were already dead, unless. Her eyes darted to the central column of swirling Vespryx, the unstable core, the real weapon. Kalen was almost upon her, his remaining eye facet fixed on her with murderous intent. He raised his fist again. Anya didn't run. She didn't fire. She did the only thing left. She lunged forward, not away, diving past Kalen's swing, straight towards the humming console beside the Vespryx core. She slammed her hand down on the emergency purge override. May had shown her, a fail-safe designed to vent the core in case of catastrophic failure. The console flashed crimson. A deafening klaxon blared. Kalen froze, his eye facet widening in what might have been shock. He understood. The containment field flickered violently. The swirling liquid light within the core column began to churn, glowing brighter, hotter. The thrumming escalated into a shriek of tortured energy. The countdown on Maya's console hit 0. But the shaped charges didn't detonate. Instead, the Vespryx core itself began to unravel. A wave of pure, incandescent energy erupted from the central column, not an explosion but a pulse, a silent, expanding sphere of raw power that vaporized the console, the machinery, Jax's body, May's frozen form, and engulfed Kalen where he stood. Naya caught at the very edge of the pulse, felt her skin blister, her vision whiting out. She was thrown backwards down the corridor like a rag doll. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was the Jarkai overseer Kalen, not disintegrating, but transmuting, his pearlescent armor melting, his form twisting into impossible screaming shapes of light and shadow as the unstable Vespryx consumed him from the inside out. Silence. Then the deep, groaning shudder of the entire refinery complex beginning to collapse. High above, on the command spire of the unblinking eye, High Overseer Vraxthol watched the primary refinery complex on Sol 3 flare with an impossible actinic green light that wasn't on any of his tactical displays. Alarms shrieked across his bridge. Energy readings spiked off the charts, then plummeted into chaotic static. "Report," Vraxthol commanded, his eye facets blazing crimson with alarm. "Overseer," a drone operator hummed frantically. "Primary Vespryx core. Catastrophic resonance cascade. Containment breach. Kalen's biosign gone. The core, it's reacting. To what?" Vraxthol stared at the dying light on the planet below, the cold logic of his mind racing, colliding with the terrifying, illogical truth dawning in his core processors. The Deathworlders hadn't just sabotaged a facility. They had weaponized the very resource the Ascendancy coveted. They had turned the planet's heart into a bomb, and they had used a Jarkai overseer as the detonator. The anomaly wasn't a myth. It was a strategy. The humans weren't broken. They were bait. And the Cathari had just swallowed the hook. The pulse didn't just destroy the refinery. It changed things. The unstable Vespryx, vented and reacting with Earth's atmosphere and crust in ways that Cathari's pristine science couldn't predict, created localized zones of wrongness. Gravity wells flickered in and out of existence. Time dilated in patches, making seconds stretch into minutes or vanish entirely. Strange, corrosive energies seeped from the ground, eating through Cathari armor like acid. The very air in the blast radius became toxic to their biology, causing their pearlescent carapaces to blister and weep. Chaos erupted. Not just on the ground, but in orbit. The unblinking eye and its attendant fleet, designed for the clean efficiency of resource extraction, not planetary-scale anomalous events, were thrown into disarray. Sensor grids overloaded. Navigation systems glitched. The carefully maintained order of the Ascendancy fractured under the weight of the unforeseen. On the ground in the ruins surrounding the smoldering crater that was once the refinery, Anya Rostova coughed, spitting blood onto the scorched earth. Her body screamed in protest. Burns covered her arms and face. Her left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and her vision swam, but she was alive. Miraculously, impossibly alive. The edge of the pulse had thrown her clear, shielded partially by a collapsed bulkhead. She dragged herself upright, wincing, using a shard of twisted metal as a crutch. The world was a haze of smoke, strange greenish light, and the groans of dying machinery. And then she saw them. Survivors. Not Cathari. Humans. Emerging from the rubble, blinking in the unnatural light, were figures she recognized from the processing lines. Hollow eyes now wide with shock. Then dawning, feral understanding. They saw the devastation. They saw the Cathari patrols stumbling, disoriented, their armor corroding, their movements sluggish in the warped gravity pockets. They saw the impossible, the invincible aliens brought low, not by superior firepower but by the very ground beneath their feet. A low murmur started among them. Then a shout. Then a roar. It wasn't organized. It wasn't strategic. It was pure, unadulterated rage. The dam of despair had broken. The sheep had remembered they had teeth. Anya watched stunned as a group of emaciated men and women, armed with nothing but rebar rods, shattered pipes, and rocks, charged a disoriented Cathari drone. They swarmed it, climbing its flailing limbs, hammering at its joints, prying at the cracks in its corroded armor with bare hands. The drone's energy weapons sputtered, misfiring wildly. It went down under the sheer, desperate weight of human bodies, torn apart not by technology, but by teeth and fingernails and the raw, screaming fury of the oppressed. This wasn't resistance. This was reclamation. Inya's comms bead crackled weakly. Onya. Inya's report. What in God's name happened? The sensors. They're going crazy. It was Elias, his voice thick with static and disbelief. We did it, Elias. Anya rasped, her voice raw. We broke the core, but it's worse. Or better. I don't know. The Cathari, they're vulnerable. Fear. In this mess we made. She looked around at the burgeoning chaos, at the humans turning on their captors with terrifying ferocity. The fight's not over, Elias. It's just changed. High Overseer Vraxthul stood rigid on his command spire, the panoramic viewport now showing a planet writhing in unnatural energies. Reports flooded in, each more alarming than the last. Ground forces were suffering catastrophic casualties not from enemy fire but from the environment. The anomalous zones were spreading. Unpredictable, defying all known physical laws. The Vespryx itself, the very substance they sought, had become a weapon turned against them. Containment protocols failing. A drone hummed, its voice laced with static. Biomasses adapting. They are exploiting the anomalies, using them as cover as weapons. Vexol's eye facets cycled through rapid, agitated colors. Crimson, violet, a sickly green. The cold logic that had governed his existence was fracturing. This wasn't warfare. This was ecological warfare. The humans weren't just fighting. They were weaponizing their own Deathworld. They were using the planet's inherent chaotic lethality as a force multiplier. Kalen's final transmission. Rexthol demanded, his hume sharp with command. Analysis. A data stream flickered before him. Grainy, distorted footage from Kalen's ocular implant. Seconds before the pulse, he saw the human female, Rostova, diving past him. He saw her hand slam the purge override. He saw the core destabilize, and then static. But in that static, Rebul saw the truth. It wasn't sabotage for destruction. It was sabotage for transformation. They hadn't just blown up the core, they had unleashed it, knowing it would create conditions where their primitive, chaotic violence could thrive. The anomaly is not inherent to the species alone. Rexthol realized aloud, the hume trembling slightly. It is symbiotic with the planet. They cultivate the chaos. They are the chaos. A new report came in, chilling in its simplicity. Overseer, long-range sensors detect multiple signatures, emerging from the outer system, unidentified vessels, bearing human designation. Rexthol's eye facets snapped to a deep, horrified black. Human designations. Impossible. Their primitive fleet was annihilated. Unless the scattered remnants, the ships that fled during the initial invasion had been hiding, waiting. And they had seen the pulse. They knew the Cathari were vulnerable. The trap wasn't just on the ground. It was system-wide. Recall all ground forces. Vaxil commanded, his hume now laced with urgency. Full defensive posture, prepare for fleet engagement. And isolate the anomalous zones. Contain the biomass. But it was too late. On the surface, the human uprising was spreading like wildfire, fueled by the Cathari's sudden vulnerability, and the sight of their overlords bleeding and dying in the toxic muck. In orbit, the first human ships battered, jury-rigged freighters and salvaged military cutters, painted with crude defiant symbols, dropped out of warp at the edge of the Sol system, their comms channels crackling with a single unified message that echoed across every frequency the Cathari monitored. Earth says hello. Anya Rostova became a symbol, not by choice but by necessity. Dragged from the ruins by survivors who recognized her from the resistance, her burns hastily bandaged, her legs splinted with scavenged metal, she was thrust into the heart of the burgeoning uprising. She wasn't a leader like Elias, coordinating from the shadows. She was a spark, a living testament that the Cathari could bleed. She moved through the liberated sectors of Vancouver, now renamed New Moscow, by its fiercely proud inhabitants, not as a soldier but as a guide. She taught them how to read the anomalies, where the gravity wells would form, where the corrosive mists gathered, where time itself stuttered. She showed them how to use the Cathari's own discarded tech, how to turn their predictable patrol routes against them in the shifting chaos. She showed them that fear was a weapon the Qatari understood, and humans had an endless supply. She saw the transformation firsthand. The hollow eyes were gone, replaced by a hard, focused light. The slumped shoulders were squared. The whispers of despair were replaced by the clang of forges. Humans melting down Qatari wreckage to make crude blades, armor, even jury-rigged energy weapons. They weren't just surviving, they were arming. One evening, standing on a rooftop, overlooking a liberated district where humans were welding Qatari drone parts into barricades, Anya was approached by a young man, barely more than a boy, his face smudged with soot, holding a crude spear tipped with a shard of pearlescent armor. "They said you killed a Jarkai with your bare hands," he said, his voice trembling with awe. Anya looked at her bandaged hands, remembering the searing pain of the pulse, the sight of Kalen dissolving. "No," she said quietly. "I just showed him the door. The planet did the rest." She met his eyes. "Remember that. We don't beat them with their strength. We beat them with ours, with this." She gestured to the ruined, toxic, unpredictable city around them. "This is our weapon. This is our home, and we know it." The boy nodded, his grip tightening on his spear, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. He wasn't just holding a weapon. He was holding a piece of Earth's defiance. Meanwhile, AIS Vance coordinated the impossible. Using the anomalous zones as natural fortresses, he directed guerrilla strikes against Qatari supply lines and command outposts. He established communication with the incoming human fleet, a ragtag armada led by Admiral Cho, a woman whose face was a roadmap of old battles and whose eyes held the cold fire of vengeance. Their plan was audacious. The ground forces would keep the Qatari fleet pinned, distracted by the chaotic surface war and the spreading anomalies, while the human fleet, small but agile and intimately familiar with solar systems, asteroid belts, and radiation zones, would launch a surprise attack on the unblinking eye itself. The Qatari, for all their technology, were fighting a war they didn't understand. Their tactics were linear, predictable. They tried to impose order on chaos, and chaos devoured them. Patrols vanished into time dilation pockets, emerging hours later to find their objectives overrun. Energy weapons misfired in the corrosive mists, sometimes backfiring on their users. Their drones, designed for efficiency, couldn't adapt to the constant shifting variables of the Deathworld environment. And the humans were everywhere. In the sewers, in the rubble, in the toxic fog, they struck like ghosts, using the anomalies as cover, inflicting 1,000 tiny cuts that bled the Qatari dry. Vespryx watched his forces dwindle. He saw the reports: squads lost to environmental hazards, drones disabled by unidentified corrosive agents, command outposts overrun by swarming biomass utilizing primitive melee tactics. The cold logic in his core processors was being eroded by a new, terrifying emotion: doubt, and beneath the doubt something colder: fear. He accessed the archives again. Not the scout report, but deeper, older records. Records of other Deathworlds encountered by the Ascendancy millennia ago. Worlds teeming with life so aggressive, so adaptable, so lethal that entire Qatari expeditionary forces had vanished without a trace. Their last transmissions filled with static and screams. Worlds deemed too dangerous to ever approach again. Soldiery hadn't been on that list. It had been deemed manageable. Vespryx realized the catastrophic error. The scout hadn't just noted the violence, they had underestimated its scale, its integration with the planet itself. They had seen tribes fighting and assumed it was limited. They hadn't understood that the entire biosphere, the very geology, was part of the weapon. Homo sapiens weren't just Deathworlders, they were the apex predators of a planet that was itself a weaponized ecosystem, and they had just been provoked. Recalibrate threat assessment. Vespryx hummed, his voice low and grave. Species: Homo sapiens. Classification: Deathworlder, extreme risk. Primary threat vector: symbiotic planetary anomaly. Recommend: immediate withdrawal. But withdrawal was impossible. The human fleet was closing in. The surface was a quagmire of chaos and human rage. And the anomalies, The anomalies were growing stronger, feeding on the spilled Vespryx in the Cathari's own dying energy signatures. The planet was healing itself by consuming its invaders. The human fleet struck at dawn, or what passed for dawn under the perpetual greenish haze. Admiral Cho's ships, little more than armed freighters and patched-together corvettes, used the asteroid belt as cover, their engines running cold, their emissions masked by the background radiation of the anomalous zones bleeding into space. They emerged from the Oort cloud like wolves, silent and hungry. The Cathari fleet, arrayed in perfect geoentric formation around the unblinking eye, was caught off guard. Their sensors, still glitching from the planetary anomalies, failed to pick up the small, cold signatures until it was too late. Human missiles cobbled together from scavenged Cathari tech and human ingenuity, streaked through the void not with pinpoint accuracy, but with overwhelming numbers and suicidal trajectories. Chaos erupted in orbit. Cathari energy lances lashed out, vaporizing human ships, but for every one destroyed, 3 more swarmed in, ramming smaller Cathari escorts, boarding them with teams of desperate, heavily armed humans who fought with the same feral ferocity as their ground counterparts. The battle wasn't won with superior firepower, it was won with sheer, reckless audacity. On the ground, Anya and Elias coordinated a massive diversion. Using captured Cathari comms, they broadcast false orders, luring major Cathari ground forces into the heart of the largest anomalous zone, a swirling vortex of distorted gravity and corrosive energy near the old refinery crater. The Cathari, desperate to regain control, marched right into the trap. Their formations dissolved as gravity shifted, pulling them into the air or crushing them into the ground. Their armor corroded, their weapons failed, and the humans, waiting in the toxic fog, descended upon them like vultures. Anyaya led a charge herself, limping on her splinted leg, wielding a Cathari pulse rifle she'd jury-rigged to fire in short, controlled bursts. She wasn't the strategist here. She was the embodiment of the fight. She saw the fear in the Cathari drones' eye facets as they were overwhelmed not by soldiers but by farmers, teachers, children, anyone who could hold a weapon. The Cathari concept of biomass shattered as the biomass fought back with terrifying individualized savagery. In orbit, Admiral Cho's flagship, the UES Resolute, took a direct hit from the unblinking eye's main battery. The bridge exploded in fire and shrapnel. Cho, bleeding from a gash on her forehead, clung to her command chair, her voice raw over the comms. "All ships, focus fire on the command spire. Rezekthal is there. Take the head." Human ships, ignoring their own damage, turned their remaining weapons on the towering spire of the Cathari flagship. Explosions bloomed across its obsidian surface. Alarms screamed on Braxtoffel's bridge. "Overseer, hull integrity failing, command spire targeted." A drone hummed, its voice breaking with static. Vespryx watched the human ships on his display, tiny but relentless, swarming his mighty vessel like insects. He saw the ground battle through external feeds, his forces being torn apart in the toxic muck by primitives wielding rocks and rage. He saw the anomalies spreading, consuming his ships that strayed too close to the atmosphere. The cold logic was gone, replaced by a terrible, dawning comprehension. They hadn't just invaded a resource-rich planet. They had invaded a nest, and the nest was fighting back with everything it had. The planet, the people, the very laws of physics twisted to their will. He accessed the emergency protocols, not for victory, for survival, for the Ascendancy's future. "Initiate protocol, silent exodus," Vespryx hummed, his voice devoid of its usual command, filled only with grim finality. "Scuttle all non-essential vessels. Overload primary reactors on a cascade sequence. Transmit all data on Sol 3, on Homo sapiens, on the anomalies, to the Ascendancy core. Maximum encryption. Priority Alpha." The drones hesitated. "Overseer, scuttle." "But the Vespryx. The mission is failure," Vespryx stated, his eye facets fixed on the image of a human woman on the ground feed, leading a charge through corrosive mist, her face a mask of pain and fury. "The resource is the weapon. The weapon is the species. Transmit this truth. Do not come here, ever again." As the Kunfari fleet began its desperate self-destructive retreat, smaller ships sacrificing themselves to cover the unblinking eyes jumped to warp, reactors overloading in blinding flashes that lit up the void. A final, devastating revelation struck Vespryx. It wasn't just the Vespryx they'd underestimated. It was the scale of the human network. His long-range sensors, flickering back online for a moment, picked up something else. Faint, but undeniable. Signals, not just from the Sol system, from dozens of other star systems. Human signals, faint echoes of the same defiant comms chatter. Faint signatures of ships moving in the dark. The humans hadn't just been hiding in Sol. They'd been spreading. While the Kathiri focused on Earth, the Deathworlders had been seeding the galaxy. Quietly, patiently, building their nest. The trap wasn't just for the Ascendancy fleet at Sol 3. It was for the entire Ascendancy. The humans weren't just defending their home. They were declaring war on the galaxy. Vespryx's final transmission, as the unblinking eye tore a hole in space-time to escape the dying system, wasn't just a warning. It was a epitaph for Kathari arrogance. They are not a resource. They are the fire. And they are everywhere. The Kathari fleet vanished into the warp, leaving behind a graveyard of shattered vessels and a planet scarred but breathing. The immediate threat was over, but the cost. The cost was written in the ashes of cities, the mass graves outside processing centers, the hollow eyes of survivors who had seen too much, done too much. In the ruins of New Moscow, Anya Rostova stood on the same rooftop where she'd spoken to the boy with the spear. Below, the work of survival had already begun. Not just rebuilding, but reclaiming. Humans were hauling Kathare wreckage to forges, planting seeds in the toxic soil somehow, miraculously, finding patches that would grow, tending to the wounded in makeshift hospitals cobbled together from rubble and hope. The air still tasted of ozone and something metallic, but beneath it, faintly, was the smell of rain on wet earth. Life, stubbornly returning. Elias Vance found her there, leaning heavily on a crutch fashioned from a Kathari strut. His face was gaunt, etched with the weight of command and loss, but his eyes held a quiet resolve. "Admiral Cho's fleet is securing orbit," he said, his voice rough, picking up survivors from other sectors. The words spreading. "We won, Anya." Against them. Anya didn't turn. She watched a group of children, their faces smudged but their eyes bright, playing amidst the rubble using shards of pearlescent armor as toys. "Did we win, Elias?" she asked, her voice low. "Or did we just survive the first bite?" Rex Thule escaped. "He'll tell them they'll come back, stronger, smarter." "Maybe," Elias conceded, stepping beside her. He followed her gaze to the children. "But they'll also know the truth now. The truth we know." He gestured to the city, to the people working, fighting, living amidst the ruins. This is our strength. Not just the anomalies, not just the rage. It's this. The refusal to stay dead. The ability to build something new from the ashes, even while the fire's still burning." He paused, looking out at the horizon, where the greenish haze was slowly thinning. And Vex's Philly, he saw it too. In the end, he saw what we are. A Centurinia finally looked at him. "What are we, Elias?" He met her gaze, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "We're the deadliest resource alive, Anya. Because we're not a resource to be taken. We're the storm that takes everything else." The victory was fragile. The anomalies didn't vanish with the Kathari. The spilled Vespryx had woven itself into the planet's fabric, creating permanent zones of strangeness. Places where gravity played tricks, where time flowed differently, where the air shimmered with latent energy. Earth was changed. Scarred, but also empowered. The humans learned to live with the new reality, even harness it. Engineers studied the anomalous zones, seeking to understand the Vespryx's interaction with their world. Farmers found crops that thrived in the strange energies. Children grew up knowing the whispers of the wind could carry echoes of the past or glimpses of the future. The human fleet, under Admiral Chu, became the nucleus of a new force, not just defenders of Earth, but guardians of the scattered human colonies Vespryx's sensors had detected. The message went out on every frequency, encrypted and unencrypted, A simple, stark declaration. We are here, we remember. Touch us. And you touched the fire. Years passed. Earth healed. Slowly, painfully. Cities rose again, not as replicas of the old, but as something new. Structures incorporating salvaged Cathari tech, built to withstand the lingering anomalies, adorned with murals depicting the uprising, the sacrifice, the defiance. Anya Rostova, her leg permanently stiff, her face lined with scars both physical and emotional, became a teacher, not of war but of resilience. She taught the new generation not just how to fight but why they fought, to protect the fragile, chaotic, beautiful thing that was human life on a deathworld that loved them fiercely. She often visited the memorial at the edge of the old refinery crater, now a lake of strangely calm, iridescent water, fed by underground springs cleansed by the Vespryx. Names were etched into black stone: Briggs, Jax, May, thousands more. The cost of forgetting their own lethality. One crisp autumn day, Anya stood by the lake, watching the water shimmer with impossible colors. A young woman approached, her uniform bearing the insignia of the new Earth Defense Fleet. A stylized flame wrapped around a globe. She saluted, her eyes holding the same fierce light Anya remembered in the boy with the spear years ago. "Ma'am," the young officer said, her voice crisp. "Admiral Cho requests your presence. Long-range probes, they've detected something. At the edge of Cathari space." Anya's blood ran cold, but her face remained calm. "What is it?" The officer hesitated, then met Anya's gaze directly. "It's not a fleet, ma'am. It's a message, boy. Cathari design. But the encryption, it's been broken. By them." Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. "What does it say?" The young officer took a deep breath. "It's a single phrase, ma'am, repeated on every frequency. Translated from the Cathari glyphs." She paused, the weight of the words hanging in the air. Anya knew what was coming. She'd seen it in Vraxthol's final horrified realization. The officer spoke the words, her voice filled with awe and a dawning, terrible understanding. "They are everywhere." Anya looked out over the iridescent lake, at the city rising from the ashes in the distance, at the children playing near the memorial. She saw not just the scars of war, but the indomitable spirit that had forged them into armor. The Kantari had learned their lesson too late. They had come for resources and found a predator. They had tried to break a species, and instead awakened a galaxy-spanning storm. The young officer shifted nervously. "What do we do, ma'am?" Anya turned, a slow, grim smile touching her lips. It wasn't a smile of joy but of fierce, unbreakable certainty. She placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder, feeling the strength in the uniform beneath her fingers. "We do what we've always done, Lieutenant," Anya said, her voice carrying the weight of history and the promise of the future. "We survive, we adapt, and we remind anyone who forgets." She looked towards the stars, towards the vast dark ocean, where other nests waited, other fires burned. "That Earth isn't just a planet, it's the spark. And the spark," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the echo of 1,000 defiant roars, "always finds the tinder." The iridescent water of the lake shimmered, reflecting the pale blue sky and the distant watchful stars. The fire was lit, and it would never go out.